Welcome. Why is it that some people can stick to a new workout routine while others give up after a week? Why do we as a society struggle with behaviors we know are bad for us? These are the central questions of health psychology. In this doctoral level review, we are going to systematically unpack the major theories that attempt to explain and predict health behavior, charting the evolution of our thinking from simple belief-based ideas to the complex, integrated frameworks we use today.
So here's our agenda. We'll begin with the foundational paradigm shift that created the field itself. Then we'll progress through individual belief models, social cognitive theories, and stage models. After that, we'll examine the modern integrated frameworks and the key debates shaping the field, before concluding with a synthesis of where we stand and where we're going.
All right, let's dive right in. Before we can analyze any modern theory, it's crucial to understand the intellectual ground it was built on. For a very long time, medicine operated on a purely biomedical model. You were either sick or you were well, and the cause was almost always seen as a pathogen, a genetic defect, or an injury. Health psychology emerged from the realization that this view was profoundly incomplete.
The biopsychosocial model was the conceptual earthquake that changed everything. It proposed that health and illness aren't just biological events. Instead, they arise from a dynamic interplay between our biology, our genes, our physiology, our psychology, our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and our social context, our family, our community, our culture. This holistic perspective created the necessary space for psychology to become a core component of health and medicine.
Okay, with that foundation in place, let's turn to the first major family of theories. These are often called expectancy value models, and they all share a core assumption that human beings are, for the most part, rational actors. They presume that we make health choices by conducting a logical, internal cost-benefit analysis based on our beliefs and expectations.
And the classic example, one of the very first, is the health belief model. You have to remember this was developed back in the 1950s by social psychologists in the U.S. Public Health Service who were trying to solve a very concrete problem: why were so few people taking advantage of free and accessible tuberculosis screenings? The theory they developed proposed that an individual's beliefs about a health threat and the recommended action could predict their behavior.
The HBM posits a kind of mental calculus. First, you assess the threat. This is a product of your perceived susceptibility. What are my chances of getting this? And your perceived severity. If I get it, how bad will it be? Then you weigh the pros and cons of taking action. You consider the perceived benefits of a behavior against the perceived barriers, things like cost, time, or side effects. For action to occur, the perceived threat and benefits must decisively outweigh those barriers.
But here's the critical weakness, and it's a big one. When you run the numbers in meta-analyses, the health belief model, on its own, often explains only about 21% of the variance in health behavior. That leaves a lot unexplained. It suggests that while beliefs are important, the model is missing key factors, particularly the powerful influence of our social environment and, things that go beyond rational calculation.
Now, trying to build on the HBM and address some of its limitations, Isaac Eisen and Martin Fishbein proposed a significant shift in focus. They argued that the most direct or proximal determinant of behavior isn't just a jumble of beliefs, but a single, unified construct, our behavioral intention. This insight is the foundation of their highly influential theory of planned behavior. The TPB argues that if you want to predict if someone will do something, the best place to start is to find out if they intend to do it. And that intention, in turn, is predicted by three things: their attitude toward the behavior, the subjective norms, which is the social pressure they perceive, and their perceived behavioral control, a concept very similar to self-efficacy, which is their confidence that they can actually perform the behavior. So if we put these two models side by side, you can see the conceptual evolution really clearly. The health belief model on the left is fundamentally a threat perception model. It's about reacting to a perceived danger. The theory of planned behavior on the right centers everything on the proactive formation of an intention. Notice also how the TPB makes social influence an explicit core predictor through subjective norms, whereas in the HBM, it's more of an afterthought.
All right, next up is protection motivation theory, or PMT. You can think of PMT as an elegant integration and refinement of these earlier ideas. It organizes the key constructs into two distinct cognitive processes. First, we engage in threat appraisal, where we evaluate the severity and our vulnerability to a health threat. And second, we engage in coping appraisal, where we evaluate the effectiveness of a recommended behavior and our own ability to perform it.
This theory became acutely relevant during the COVID-19 pandemic. The threat appraisal pathway was all about our perception of the virus's severity and our personal risk. The coping appraisal pathway was our assessment of protective behaviors. Did we believe masks worked? That's response efficacy. And did we feel confident that we could actually maintain social distancing? That's self-efficacy. Studies consistently showed that both of these pathways strongly predicted who adopted preventive behaviors.
So, the models we've discussed so far are heavily cognitive. They focus on an individual's beliefs and calculations. But we don't make decisions in a social vacuum. The next major theoretical leap was to more fully integrate the role of the social environment and a person's fundamental belief in their own capabilities.
And you really can't overstate the importance of this construct. Albert Bandura's concept of self-efficacy, which emerged from his broader social cognitive theory, was an absolute game-changer. It's not about what you know you should do, it's your specific belief that you can do it. This one idea has proven to be so consistently powerful in predicting behavior change that it has been incorporated into virtually every modern health behavior theory.
This brings us to a central challenge in our field, the notorious intention-behavior gap. We all know people, or let's be honest, have been those people, who form a strong intention to change a behavior, but then fail to follow through. The Health Action Process Approach, or HAPA, developed by Ralph Schwartzer, was designed specifically to address and explain this gap.
The brilliance of HAPA is its division of the change process into two distinct phases. First is the motivation phase, where an individual forms an intention. This is driven by constructs we've already seen, but the key innovation is the second part, the volition phase. This is the phase of action, and it argues that getting started and keeping going requires different psychological resources, like detailed planning and a specific type of self-efficacy called maintenance self-efficacy, the belief you can stick with it even when things get difficult.
The distinction HAPA makes between motivation and volition leads us perfectly into our next class of models. These frameworks move away from seeing behavior change as a single, discrete event. Instead, they conceptualize it as a process, a journey that unfolds over time through a sequence of qualitatively different stages.
And the most well-known of these is the Trans-Theoretical Model, or TTM, from Prochaska and DiClemente. It posits that individuals move through these 5 stages of change. The profound clinical implication here is that interventions must be tailored to an individual's current stage of readiness. You simply cannot use the same approach for someone in pre-contemplation who isn't even considering a change as you would for someone in the action stage who is actively working on their new behavior.
Okay, this brings us to the contemporary era. The field has largely moved away from pitting single theories against one another. The focus now is on developing comprehensive, integrated frameworks. You can think of these less as theories and more as toolkits for practitioners, systematic guides for diagnosing a behavioral problem and designing a targeted intervention.
The Information Motivation Behavioral Skills Model, or IMB, is a perfect example of this practical approach. It argues that for behavior change to occur, people generally need 3 things: accurate information, sufficient motivation, and the necessary behavioral skills to enact the change. What's so useful about this model is that it provides a very clear, testable structure for developing interventions, as you can see in a complex study design like this one.
Now, perhaps the most influential contemporary framework is the COM-B model from Susan Mischie and her colleagues. It's incredibly elegant in its simplicity. It posits that for any behavior to occur, you must have the capability, the opportunity, and the motivation. Capability refers to both psychological and physical skills. Opportunity is about the external environment, and motivation includes both reflective and automatic processes. The real power of COM-B is that it serves as the hub of a larger system, the behavior change wheel, which links behavioral diagnoses directly to evidence-based intervention strategies.
And this brings us back again to that fundamental debate, the intention-behavior gap. We now know that intention alone is a poor predictor of behavior. This gap is the central problem that modern frameworks are trying to solve. Models like HAPA and COM-B move us past a simplistic focus on intention. They force us to also consider crucial factors like planning, skills, habits, and, importantly, whether a person's environment even makes the healthy choice possible.
So, let's synthesize all of this and look to the future. The historical progression from simple belief models to these complex, multi-level intervention frameworks reflects a maturing science. We have a much more nuanced understanding of human behavior than we did 50 years ago. But of course, major challenges and critical questions remain.
And this is really the frontier. How do our theories, many of which were developed in a pre-digital age, apply to interventions delivered through smartphones and AI?
And even more critically, how do we modify these models to truly account for the powerful influence of structural determinants of health? Things like systemic poverty and discrimination don't just influence choice. They constrain an individual's capability, opportunity, and motivation from the very beginning. Integrating these macro-level factors into our micro-level theories is without a doubt the next great task for health psychology.